When I was a lot younger, we had our first two kids, and our first two kids were born pretty close together. They were like 15 months apart, and it was a handful. So our oldest would come into the bedroom where we were sleeping with the baby early in the morning and insist on our attention as much as possible. When I went back to work a couple weeks after the baby was born, this changed dramatically because our oldest would come in and I'd be gone. Well, my wife would start telling them, Daddy's at work. And that was the explanation that our child needed, because here at 15, 16 months old, they would come into our room and within 3 days say, "Where's Daddy?" "Oh, at work." Now, they had absolutely no idea what work meant. They had no idea that I was off driving around Austin to different campuses and teaching students. The only thing that they knew was that there was an explanation for why I was gone and that it was work. And it took maybe 3 days for this to be completely understood, that when I wasn't there, I was at work. For all they knew, I was off fathering some other family, dealing with some other kid and some other baby. But the word work was all that they needed to know. That was enough. My point is that we often mistake the symbol for something, for an understanding of something. We are always grasping with this, and it's a problem that doesn't really go away. Now, it makes all sorts of very functional ideas possible, and we've been touching on this, of course. The notion of a bed, a spoon, a fork, a chair is a symbolic notion that we can use to understand each other and understand at a very practical level what somebody's talking about. But what we're missing is that we make these connections between the symbol and the thing so utterly quickly that it can circumnavigate our thinking. It can go right around any sort of reasoning skills that you have and plug in instantly to your reactionary narrator in your brain. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. It sounds rather abstract, so we're going to try really hard to get concrete with it. There are certain words that are used to sell to us all the time. It is absolutely possible to go to a grocery store right now and pick up a can of pineapple and have it say on it, "Fresh pineapple." You can go down to the next aisle and pick up a can of apple pie filling, and it will say, "Homemade apple pie filling." Now, no one in their right minds believes that a fresh pineapple comes out of a can, or that homemade pie filling comes out of a can. And yet these words are these little coins for meaning, these little markers for some sort of sincerity that speaks to us. Now, that may not seem like a very extreme example. It's easy to sit there and assume that, salespeople say things and it doesn't really mean anything to me when it's said. But numerous studies have shown that the words that we use to describe something really affects how we witness something. So, for example, they've done this test where they have people who have seen a car accident. Eyewitnesses to a car accident will describe it differently when they're interviewed about it, depending on how the interviewer poses their question. So, for example, if you saw a car accident and you say, okay, So tell me what happened when the cars bumped into each other. Versus, tell me what happened when the cars smashed into each other. The group that you say, tell me about the bump, will describe a much slower, much less violent accident than the group who's describing the smash. Same car accident, same angle, same speeds, but the witness will come up with an entirely different story, depending on what words are used when evoking the memory of the car accident. Now listen, that sounds insane, right? But these assumptions are made in our minds instantly, and we tend to address somebody based on what we assume they want to hear. And the word that they use will instantaneously change the way we understood something. Okay, let's get a little more concrete here. There's a passage from a little example of this phenomenon that my grandmother used to teach in her college courses. And it starts out saying, "The girl came to the door of the room and stopped. She looked around and found her escort." Then there's another version of it. "The woman approached the entrance to the room and paused. She glanced about the room and found her companion." Now, though these words have similar meanings, our understanding of them are completely different based on the way in which they're used. Now, English is wonderful for this because English has tons and tons and tons of words. English has almost twice as many words as Spanish has, and Spanish has the second most amount of words in usage. So you're able through English to express all sorts of different borrowed meanings from the inflection, from the baggage that words bring with them, from the way that we use it, halt versus stopped, glanced versus looked around, plain versus flattering, something like that. All these different ways that we can angle what it is that we're talking about. Now, this is no secret. If you've read George Orwell's 1984, one of the primary things that the party does to control people is through this notion of newspeak. And newspeak is employing an army of party members who are constantly revising books, speeches, texts from the past to use fewer and fewer words, to conjugate words, to use the most simple synonym for words. And once that edition is out and has been circulating around for a while, they shrink it again and shrink it again, over and over again, so that narrowing the number of words that are being used by the populace actually narrows the thoughts that people have access to, their ability to express themselves. And the idea being that a populace who thinks along narrower lines, more predictable ways, is easier to control than a populace who has the full ability of human expression and human emotion. Now, 1984 is fiction, it's a novel, but I think that we can sort of see the power of this in our lives. If you've read another novel, The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, this is a very controversial novel for a number of reasons. But one thing that is not controversial about it is the absolutely stunning use of language in this book. The language is so dense, is so full of illusions, so full of images, that it takes me a long time to get through this 90-page book. I have to constantly stop. And there are words that even through context, I get the feel for them, but that I haven't encountered before. And this is fascinating to me. and I'll look them up for their exact meaning, their origin, and whatnot. Now, who is this Joseph Conrad? How did he use words that are so far beyond my grasp? I tend to think of myself as someone with a pretty high vocabulary. I read a lot. I teach English. Should be my forte. And yet, every single time I read this novel, I bump into words that I don't have a working memory of. Well, English is Joseph Conrad's third language. He approached this language as a newcomer in a more mature age and learned it from a perspective that was unclouded by the familiar usages of people around him. This is a massive advantage for most of us. For most of us, we have acquired about 80% of the words that we will use on a daily basis by the age of 5. Now that's an amazing feat, an astounding feat to be able to do that. This brain plasticity of a child, their ability to absorb a language and use a language, is absolutely stunning to watch. I was really worried about this when we had our first kid. I was really worried that I was going to screw up and not be able to teach speaking right. I mean, talk about a completely unfounded worry. Instead, within a couple years, we were trying to watch much more carefully our own word choices when playing a heated game of Mario Kart, because the profanity does fly in competition, and kids pick up on it so quickly. Emotionally charged language is absolutely attractive to their little thirsty minds, and they instantly employ it the minute they hear it. It's impressive. Now, we don't have that kind of access to that level of neuroplasticity later on in life, and that's why languages are much easier to learn early on. And if you can teach your child, sign language and English and any other sort of second or third language at the same time, you have a much easier time of it at those young ages. But it really molds how we think. The words we use, even if you feel like you don't think in words, our language very much molds many of the ways that we think. Helen Keller, who in infancy became blind and deaf, said that she really didn't experience what we think of as an internal monologue, as thinking thoughts in the sort of normal sense, until she had acquired a language, until she had acquired a way to express it. And she was a much older child before she learned how to communicate through sign language and then ultimately through speaking. And it's amazing to sort of imagine what the mind might be like without a language, without putting a word to your experiences, without using that word as a sort of like, again, this coin for some other thing. But this sets up a problem in our thinking where the symbol is very often given more weight than the actual thing. For example, you're at a grocery store. You're leaving your grocery store and you're floored at how much money you spent. You just spent a couple $100. Your bank account is low now, and you're putting your baskets, your bags of food into your car, and you're lamenting that you got such expensive stuff. Now, I invite you to pause when this happens, because this happens to me on a weekly basis, that I'm always floored at how much I spend at a grocery store. But remember, that is what that money is for. Money is not a thing in and of itself. Money is an idea. It's a concept. It's something that comes in and out of your life. It's numbers. It's not a friend. It's not a family member. It is not something that you can hold on to with any real purpose, besides if you're in the act of acquiring more of it. So when I use the word a coin as a symbol, there's nothing more literal than what a coin is. That you're holding what is symbolically food when you hold money. That the money you have is there to house and feed you and perhaps get you from point A to point B, and whatever's left over you can use for all kinds of fun things, or you can, skip the avocado toast and buy a house next week or whatever. But my point is that we get all wrapped up when we buy necessities, when we pay for our rent, when we pay for our bills or buy a tank of gas for our morning commute. But that is what it is there for. That is what it is reserved for. That is what it is a symbol for. It is a symbol for your ability to eat this week. And yet, man, that guilt hits you because you hate to see those numbers get depleted. And these days, more than ever, we're dealing with abstract numbers more than we are any sort of physical presence of some sort of, printed money or inherently valuable metal or something like that. It is all numbers. And the banks play with these numbers in a really interesting way. Banks are able to lend out the same dollar 10 times. So if a bank has $10, it can lend out $100 to 10 different people on the assumption that this is going to be paid back with interest from them, and that they would then be able to lend it out anyway. And, so far as we know, 10 times is the limit of this, but they don't have to have $100 to lend out $100. They only have to have 10. So all of this very imaginary stuff, and through this whole system of imagining our access to money by lending, by borrowing, by this, multi-pronged lending that they do, has gotten us pretty far in the last couple hundred years. It has increased our productivity and our access to things like transportation and housing and whatnot. And when you hear, some sort of politician tell you something about what is and isn't possible in the world of money, just know that they don't believe it. Just know that the whole concept is entirely pliable and flexible and could go any number of ways. But our belief in the solidness of currency, our belief in the oneness of a dollar, is what grants it its value. It's only valuable because you can have it and nobody else can. And it's interesting to figure that, really, you don't have anything. Neither does anybody else, 10 times. So, when you're looking across the room at a person, you're looking with two eyes. Why aren't you seeing two of them? You only see one image. You are seeing a symbol of what is there. We talked about a chair when we were talking about lateral thinking, talking about how a chair does not necessarily have to be a chair. It could be anything that we all agree on, and any description of a chair shows the individual nature of this particular chair versus the notion that you had just at the word chair. But remember this, that when you look at a chair, when you touch a chair, when you interact or sit on a chair, that mostly you're dealing with absolutely empty space. And you don't see it that way. You see something solid. You see something plain and unchangeable and unmoving. But in fact, you're looking at a vast amount of energy in very, very quick motion, surrounding mostly nothing. I bring this up because we basically hallucinate the world around us. Our perception, which is one of our primary limitations, is a hallucination. It's a representation that is built along the lines of our evolution. And this is why symbols can take on such grand meaning for us, because of the entire way we perceive the world is through symbols. And our brain is wired to substitute symbols for meaning instantaneously. Evolution is a very interesting process. We think of evolution, survival of the fittest, as making some sort of super beings, as making some sort of super adaptations to our surroundings. But really what evolution does is the absolute bare minimum it can to get by. Evolution creates species that are changeable, yes, that adapt, yes, but only to a minimal degree. Otherwise, why don't sharks have wings? Why can't they breathe in the air? Why don't they have amazing binocular vision with fantastic depth perception? Why aren't they the fastest land mammal in addition to being an amazing water fish? Why don't people have like laser rays that come out of their eyes? That would be a lot easier. Why don't we have like fantastic like claws and fangs? Why did we put all of our eggs in this whole brain basket? It's because evolution only does the bare minimum. It does not take you in every fantastic direction at once. Yes, some animals seem to be much better adapted than others in certain conditions, but all of them are adapted in just the right way for where they are and where they grew up. And people have adaptations that came to us over millions of years that now, in our daily operations, present limitations. Now, it is handy to see a chair and feel a chair when in fact mostly it's not there. There's no doubt about it, because you can sit on a chair and you would still be able to sit on it even if you knew that most of it wasn't there, and there really wouldn't be very much practical application to that knowledge. But there are other times where this symbol making really gets in the way. We tend to make better distinctions between people who look like us. People, if you're a, cis white man, you tend to be able to make better distinctions between other cis white men than you can between women or between black men and black women, or between any other race, any other sort of gender that you can, think of, because we're able to see more the individuality of ourself versus someone who's very much like us. Again, our brain is trying very hard not to think. It's trying very hard to place a symbol in the way. And a lot of racism and sexism comes from this very fast assumption of this supreme humanity that I hold, that everybody else just represents a type. Everybody else just represents a person. So somebody cuts me off in traffic, and it's someone like me, I can say, man, that guy sucks. That guy's a terrible driver. He made me mad. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, and they're not like me. Suddenly I'm able to say, wow, women are terrible drivers. Women are too emotional behind the wheel. And you start jumping to all these other little assumptions about the world that you don't know. And you make this woman representative of her entire gender, where you have never seen yourself as representative of your race, your gender, your sexuality, your political beliefs. We're able to make subtle distinctions there. But our subtlety drifts from us when we encounter something that we aren't as familiar with as we are with ourselves, because you instantly want to substitute that symbol for something else, for some other sort of level of understanding. Our brain creates an instant narrative from its inputs. Going back to that split brain experiment where they had to cut people's brains in half and sever the two hemispheres in order to stop epilepsy, they would show one side of the brain these horrifying films of people falling into fire, of people bursting into flames. Horrible, discomforting films. And in speaking to the other side of the brain, they would feel the uneasiness of this, but not know why. And they were able to say, I don't feel safe in here. I feel really creeped out in here. Are you trying to do something to me? That instantly their brain would suppose a suspicion would suppose a lack of safety due to the emotional response of the other side of the brain to this horrifying footage. It instantly creates some sort of new input, some sort of new reason why it doesn't feel safe. And it thinks that there's something wrong with the experimenter. We find that our memory works in these same generalized symbolic ways at its very root. There's a really neat experiment that was done with this terribly unfortunate woman who had absolutely no memory. Her memory was, her short-term memory was so completely gone that if you left the room and came back in, she had no idea you were ever there. And so the doctor became very aware of this, the doctor who was trying to help her. Every time he left the room and came back in, he'd have to reintroduce himself. He'd reach out and shake his hand, say who he was, explain that he'd been seeing her for some time about this condition and trying to help out. And, clearly this woman had a grasp of language, had memories from being a child, but had nothing new, had no ability to form new memories. They were only able to form and hold on to these core memories from childhood, from back in that time with that brain plasticity was really going and really able to form these anchoring notions that we live our lives by. So the doctor tried this one day. He came up to her, and when he shook her hand, he had a pin hiding in his fingers, and he pricked her with it. And she went, "Ow!" and was really offended by this, and he left the room. And he came back in, and she says, "Oh, hello." And he goes, "Hi, I'm Dr. Such and Such." And he reached out his hand to shake her hand, and she reached out hers, and at the last second pulled her hand back. And the doctor said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you don't want to shake my hand?" And the woman said, "Sometimes doctors try to hurt people." Instantly, her brain knew there was some sort of danger there. It had no idea what, but she had imprinted on her body pain from shaking this man's hand. And instead of it being a solid memory, "You stuck a pin in my hand last time you were here just 5 seconds ago." Instead, it became this hard and fast rule. Sometimes doctors want to hurt people. So, our notion of reality is based on the way that we witness and take in and remember things. All of us have had that experience when we were younger where we realized that maybe not everybody sees the color blue the same way that we do. Maybe not everybody sees the color red the same way that we do. Maybe we're just describing something that we each see in our own individual way time and time again. But really what's going on, so far as we can tell, is that from infancy, you describe the world to a kid. You describe the world to a child, and it brings them further and further from whatever individual ideas they may have about the reality around them, and closer into that indoctrinated world of your reality. Now, there are some absolutely sort of terrifying case studies done about children who have had no one talk to them and no one form relationships with them and been taken in at much older ages and have not been able to acclimate to reality in the same ways that younger kids do. So we know that the neuroplasticity has a lot to do with the way that we borrow definitions for different things and the way that we substitute that sort of meaning. But what I want you to consider, going back to the chair, going back to this mostly empty chair, is I want you to consider yourself, what you think of as yourself. I want you to consider that you are a product of your language, has a lot to do with how you think, of your perception, has a lot to do with how you think, of your racial, sexual, gender identity, has a lot to do with how you think of others and how you think of yourself, and that this context is so intertwined within you that it's very hard to grasp at what it is inside you that is unchangeable, that is your true self, where your true self is based. Now, most of us think of our true self as our mind. It's that inner monologue. But that can be disrupted, for one, and it can be dreadfully wrong. You could have an experience when you're really younger that has you absolutely frightened of men, say, or of people of a certain race, or of certain cars, or of the ocean, because something traumatic happened that entwined the symbol of this thing that you didn't understand with that danger, that trauma, that pain. So it can't be that inner narrator. It can't be that voice. But most of us tend to position ourselves somewhere between our ears and behind our eyes. It's a comfortable place to imagine us being. But keep in mind that people throughout history haven't always identified with the brain as the self. Throughout history, you had different cultures thought that the heart has more to do with who you are. The Egyptians thought that the liver was the seat of the soul. And if you've ever held a liver, it's probably has a lot to do with how absolutely gorgeous they are compared to many other organs in your body. Just a jet black, smooth, nice kind of slimy thing. Yeah, maybe that's where we are, our liver. But get this. We're so caught up with our body. Think about your hand. Think about your fingers. Think about your hair, your eyes, your brain. With each one of these things, my hand, my fingers, my hair, my eyes, my brain, who is this my who has these things? I didn't say, my hand is me. These fingers are me. I am my hair. I am my eyes. This brain is me. We don't say that. We say they belong to me. So something in our language has us positioned somewhere different than our body. Is this language? Does this have more to do with who we are? Well, maybe, because for one thing, keep in mind that there is nothing inside you that was there 7 years ago. No cell tissue, nothing living inside you, is the same as you were 7 years ago. Because our cells are dying and creating copies of themselves over and over again. And we recycle all of this in about 7 years. So I'm 42 years old. I'm on body number 6 now? Or I'm heading into body number 7? I'm on my 7th body. I have a continuous stream of memories that goes back to my 2nd birthday. And yet, I have changed bodies 5 times since then. Wait, 6 times since then? We're changing bodies as we go along now. Alan Watts, the fantastic philosopher, says that when you think of a person, think about the energy that is going through them, and not just the matter that creates them right now. Think of it like a familiar waterfall, a familiar whirlpool, that you can go and return to this place time and time again and see this waterfall and see this whirlpool, but it's always different water running through it. And that is, in fact, how we are. That we are energy masquerading as matter, all of this energy which has come from the sun, all of this matter which has come from other burst stars throughout history. And yet we come up with this absolutely cohesive narrative about who and what we are that is so hard to question, that we identify with our name, with our body, with our thoughts, with our words. We identify with them so closely without really questioning the nature of all of this very often. Now, again, it's not practical to, is it? But what I want to show you with this whole thing is that if you slow down your thinking, if you're able to isolate your thoughts, you're able to act mindfully, you can start disrupting the instant reaction to things on that symbolic level. You can start to question things so that you can behave in a slightly more human way. And what I mean by behaving in a slightly more human way is granting other people the same humanity that you grant yourself. When you behave in a racist way, when you behave in a culturally centric way, when you behave in a sexist way, or a homophobic way, or a genderphobic way, you are allowing yourself this long leash on what it means to be human. That you are free to excel. You are free to think. You are free to learn and perform and do all sorts of things. But this person isn't. This person is bound by their biology. This person is stuck with who they are because of their race, because of their culture. That because of this person's religion, they are stupid, but you are enlightened. Because of this person's gender, they are not able to function in the same dynamic, movable ways that you are. And you might even see this as some sort of positive. You might have a, racist or sexist trope that puts them somehow above your thinking. Oh, this guy's good at math because of his race. Oh, this woman is a much better person than mine because they're a woman and they have this mothering instinct. But still, you are taking away their humanity by saying that they are bound by their biology when you are not, when you are free of this. And a lot of those impulses that race through us all the time have to do with the same mechanism that instantly substitutes symbol for meaning, and instantly makes somebody symbolic of their entire population, symbolic of their entire sex, symbolic of their entire religion. But we know that things aren't that way. But it's hard to act that way. This is why anecdotal evidence is so powerful to people. You can tell somebody one story of the horrible thing that happened at the beach, and wow, we get scared of sharks real quick. You don't have to be scared of sharks. You're not going to die from shark, ever. And yet every one of us, that minute that our feet are not touching the bottom in the ocean, we're able to recall every horrifying shark story we've ever heard. It's irrational. But again, we substitute this one story for some sort of a meaning that we should all learn from. Now, this makes stuff like literature really handy because you can encode types of people into characters. You can deeply encode behaviors of cultures into 2 or 3 characters and show through fiction these wonderful lessons about how we should be and how we should be able to act far above our nature, far above that conditioning, far above that biological programming and evolution. And that is really the power of being a person. The ability to tell a story, the ability to distill into a story these deep-seated meanings. So yeah, it's useful, but it also needs to be slowed down, it needs to be isolated, and it needs to be stopped if you are to interact with the world as an educated person who does not just walk around with the assumption that your first thought is correct. That because you're smart, you know. Because if you do that, you're forever locked in your own ignorance.